And we are on for module number 2, the Essential Coaching Foundation. So in this module, we're going to continue in the foundational piece. We're going to talk a lot about the brain and how it's wired and how it consumes information and all of that good stuff. Hopefully you have the handout. It was uploaded in the Facebook group on the files page, and all the links are also being emailed to all of you guys. So you can go ahead and follow along, obviously, with the handout. Um, Before I started the recording here, I asked the question, what did you get out of the first call? So I just wanted to go through a few of those, just to kind of represent us to some of the conversations and some of the highlights that people got. So Sophia says it's easier to be a better coach, which I totally understand. And well, I understand now, and I totally 100% agree with. I am an iceberg, says Mary. We all are. There's so much below the surface, right? Yes. Dana says we don't need answers. Correct. And the next one right behind her says be an asking machine, not an answering machine. I love it, Jamie. That's so true. Dana says resisting at the emotional level results in not doing the thing. Yes. Carrie says listening to understand. Barb says, I love this information. Deborah says, remove the emotional risk of failure and you'll remove the emotional resistance to the effort. That's a huge one. We'll get into fear another time, but just to highlight that piece, all fear is created because there is a perceived negative risk. And as soon as you can remove the perceived negative risk, then your mind literally cannot create fear. I mean, it's like you biologically short circuit the fear. And the reason that's important is because then you don't have to wrestle with the fears. That's what a lot of people are doing, is they're wrestling at the surface level, at the conscious intellectual level. And there are some cool ways to think about fear at the intellectual level, false evidence appearing real, and every no gets you closer to a yes, and everybody has to fail, you just got to fail forward. All of those sayings are true intellectually, but an intellectual solution can't solve an emotional problem, right? So what I prefer to do is dissect the emotional problems, and if there's an element that we can remove, then the whole thing comes crashing down. So let me give you an example of that as an application. Let's say somebody's afraid of failure, right? If we break down the fear of failure, the element that actually makes the whole thing run is the judgment that something is a failure. That's the element, right? Because, like, if you ask somebody for something, you ask them to buy a program or join your business or something, and they say no, there is no inherent meaning in that human sound. It's just a sound. It's just a sound, right? Somebody says no, that's just a sound. There's no inherent meaning in it until we place a meaning on it. And it's that judgment of what this human sound means, and then what it means about us and our own inadequacies, that creates this concept called fear. I'm sorry, called failure, that we all fear, right? So we don't fear the failure, we fear how we make ourselves feel after the failure. And so then what we do with the client is we dive in and we figure out why. We explore, right? Ferocious curiosity. We explore why they are judging, assessing that outcome as a failure. Now, remember, we want to keep everything neutral. It's just an outcome until the client says it's a failure, and then they make it mean all this other stuff, right? So then we decide, or we identify rather, what is at play in why the client is labeling this thing as a failure. And then if we can simply not label it as a failure, if we can label it as a learning, or we can label it as forward momentum, or we can do whatever emotional work might need to be done, which we'll get into later in the course, that can derail that label of failure. And if they don't have the label of failure, then they won't abuse themselves. Well, then they can't be afraid of doing that activity anymore, because they've removed the element that's actually causing the pain. And this could be different for each person. That's why this work is individual in nature. But if we can get in there, it's kind of like if you imagine a line of dominoes, right? Let's say you've got 10 dominoes lined up and they're all close together, and you flick one of them, the one at the front of the line, and they're all going to go down. Well, what if we took the third domino out of the line? And let's just say that the gap where the third domino gets removed is big enough to where the second domino can't touch the fourth one, right? So even if it gets triggered, even if the first domino hits the second domino just falls and it doesn't do anything. It can't hit the fourth one. That's how I want you to think about what it means to dissect and remove the element. So if we remove the domino, then the failure can still occur, or what used to be called failure. People can still say no. But if we remove the third domino, which is the operating element that made everything else go, then none of the other dominoes are going to fall. And that final domino could be depression or misery or some negative choice, right? So that's what we're doing when we're diving in and saying, what's actually at play here? What's the ingredient that I can remove from this recipe? And so risk in fear, that's the ingredient. So whatever we can do to remove the perceived risk is the way that you can short circuit the whole line of dominoes called fear. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. And let's see, get a couple more here. Listening, or learning to listen to understand, not respond. That's a huge one. Kathy said you could have been talking to me the entire time. I was constantly in a wow state. That's awesome. One of the things about this content is people consume it so deeply because it's got so many applications to our own personal lives, right? And when we get into this content, they say the human brain can't really focus for an extended period of time. They say in teaching, you only want to teach for about 45 minutes or maybe an hour before giving people a break. And I don't intentionally break all those rules, but what I've learned is that when we're dealing with content that pulls you in, there's such an intrigue factor and there's such a wow factor, like you just said. It's like, oh, this is why I used to do that, or this is why I still do this, or this is why my mom did that, or this is why my brother can't do this. And it's like all these dots start to get connected, and it's just so fascinating when we dive in and start figuring ourselves out, or start connecting all these dots in our lives. And that's why this kind of content is so fascinating for people. So I totally agree with you. And I said on the last call just how much I love this. Okay, just a few more here. Focusing not on results, but on the effort. That's a huge one. Barb says failure is simply feedback. Absolutely. And I wish I could have had that in writing to study more. If you're talking about everything that I just said, Cindy, then the great news is, it's recorded. So you can go back and listen to it the first few minutes of this particular course. Okay, so let's get into this handout. The outline for what we're going to talk about today is human brain stuff. At the beginning, we'll talk about the 3 things that the human brain is wired to do. And what happens is a lot of times we expect ourselves to do things that the human brain is literally incapable of doing. Like one lady asked me one time, I've been working on myself a lot, and I just want to know when all the doubts and all the fears are going to go away. And I said, like, with no hesitation, I said, death. Like, don't rush to get there, because that's the only time that your brain will stop creating fears and stop creating doubts. That's what it does. You can't expect the human brain to do things that it doesn't do. And you can't expect it to stop doing things that it is wired and programmed to do. So most people, well, I don't know about most, but a lot of people are expecting to live according to rules that don't apply to human beings, right? Like a lot of people think that before they become really successful, they got to clear themselves of all their fears. And then as soon as I have all these fears gone, well, then I can take action. No, that's not the way it works. You just have to take action. You have to go one step at a time and keep going. And some of your fears will be handled on the journey, in motion. That's the best way to handle fears, in motion. There's no prerequisite called, let me get rid of all my fears and then I'll take committed action and then I'll be successful. But too many people misunderstand what it actually takes to succeed and what successful people do or don't do. A lot of people believe that successful people don't have fears anymore, or successful people don't question themselves anymore. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean they don't experience it. My experience with meeting a bunch of people in this industry and other industries and being fascinated about this stuff, enough to ask them about it, is that they all still have the fears and the doubts. It's just that they've conquered them to a level that a lot of people haven't conquered them, which have allowed them to take more action or achieved more success, right, in the form of tangible results. But they still have doubts and fears for their next level, right? Because that's how the human brain works. That's how the edge of our comfort zone works. But most people, just because you don't see it, or because you think, okay, well, this person just got up on stage and spoke, well, they must not have a fear of speaking. You don't know what happened behind the curtain just before they got on stage. And I'll tell you, most speakers are still afraid, at the very least, very anxious before they take the stage, right? So don't compare your negativity to somebody else's positivity, right? I think one of the quotes I heard one time says, don't compare your dress rehearsal to somebody else's opening night, right? Something like that. But don't think that just because people are successful, they don't have these internal conflicts, because then you'll think you can't have the conflicts in order to be successful, and that's just not true. It's a fallacy of thinking, and a lot of people's misunderstanding of what the process is supposed to look like is the reason they never really get going on it. So then we'll get into the filters, the stages of learning, and speaking with the unconscious mind. So all of this is really brain work, right? Now, before we get into it, let's talk about why we even need to study how the brain learns. And you can take a look at this graphic if you're on the webinar and looking at the slides. You got the seed all the way over to the left, and then you've got the different stages of growth, right? And when we are looking at our own lives, or we're looking at a client or a team member's lives, we're seeing what's above the surface. We're seeing that, that little plant with the stem and whatever life circumstances look like. That's what we're seeing. As coaches and as advanced leaders, we need to understand where they came from. We need to be able to retrace, at least from a conceptual standpoint, retrace this evolution right here, right? How does a seed that was planted many, many, many years ago evolve into the fear of speaking, or evolve into the fear of failure, or evolve into time management problems, or evolve into procrastination, or any forms of sabotage or blocks, or whatever is holding somebody back from achieving what they want. We've got to understand this evolution process, right? And so in module number 1, I talked about the 5 targets of transformation. This is what I'm referring to, is what are we going to look at? What are we going to observe? What are we going to ask questions to try to uncover? What are these targets that we're going to go after in order to try to create transformation for people? Now, many of you've heard this analogy or some version of the analogy, right? If you have weeds in your garden, if all you do is continue to snip the weeds above the surface, they're just going to keep growing back. You've got to uproot the weeds. And so that's what we're doing with the challenges that we have internally. We've got to uproot the challenges. And then you don't have to worry about the weed ever growing again because you've just short circuited it. It's like what we talked about with the fears, right? You've gotten rid of the actual problem. So the reason we want to study how the human brain learns is because, and this is like a different version, a more detailed version of the iceberg image on the last module. It's basically the same kind of concept. You've got above ground and you've got below the ground, right? But we're just getting a little bit more granular and a little bit more detailed now. So above the surface, you've got observable behaviors and life circumstances, right? So the behaviors are the patterns that we have. The circumstances are, what your body looks like, how much money you have, what have you. Those are the circumstances, and then we've got all of our behavior patterns. That's where most people play. That's what most people focus on. That's how a lot of people try to change their own stuff, or a lot of coaches or leaders will try to help other people change their behaviors above the surface. And the reason it doesn't work is because you got all these things below the surface: your experiences, your memories, your beliefs, your values, your drivers, your attitudes, your meta programs, your identities, your core self. All of those things are at play below the surface. So you can try as hard as you want to change the observable stuff above the surface, but unless you understand what created all of it, it's going to be futile. If it does work, it's going to be short-lived, right? Now, what we want to pay attention to is language, because language is the connector between the two. We've got external language and internal language, right? So our internal language is our head talk, what we're saying to ourselves. External language is anything that's coming out of our mouth. As a coach, this is something that's going to come up later on in this course. As a coach, you have to be a language cop. You have to be a language cop. You have to be so aware of people's language. You have to pay attention to the words, the syllables, the tonality, the rhythm. You have to pay attention to the most significant clue, in my opinion, that people are giving you, which is the words that are coming out of their mouth. If you pay attention to that, then you're going to be able to understand what to look for, right? So I just got a comment from somebody that says my sound is cutting in and out. I don't have any comments from anybody else on that. If you're hearing me okay, just type in I hear you okay. Okay, so yeah, Aaron, sorry, it looks like it's just your end, so I apologize. I'm not able to fix just your end. Okay, so as a coach and as a leader, you want to pay attention to the language, because when you listen to it, the language that people use will give you the clues. Sometimes the language will say, ask me about this, or the language will say, I don't believe in what I just said, right? If you pay attention to it. And people can say the exact same word completely differently. Sometimes you'll hear a crack in the voice. Sometimes you'll feel there's no resonance in a certain word that they say. And other people that aren't paying attention to it will never notice it. But we'll dive deeper into this. Trust me, we'll do like a whole module on language and what to look for, and how to explore and challenge people's language. But that is the connector between the two. So when you hear what people say, you'll know then where we've got to explore below the surface. That's the most important piece, in my opinion, from a coaching perspective, for you to grab onto, because that's the observable piece. All right. Okay. Let's get into how the human brain learns. The human brain does three main things. Diane just commented, all of this is so huge. Once I let go of my 40 years of hanging on to my past, I was a totally different person. Exactly. That's the big breakthrough that I was talking about on module number 1. Just having that huge breakthrough, and then neurologically I was shifted, right? When you uproot some of these weeds, it feels like a neurological shift. So the brain does three main things. And what we're doing right now, it's like we're studying the engine. We're studying the engine under the hood, right? Because if you understand how engines work, then you can work on a bunch of different kinds of engines, right? And fundamentally, most engines are the same. Like if you look thinking about a car engine or an airplane engine, I mean, there's some variations, of course, based on the companies and the actual vehicle that is powering. But for the most part, engines are the same. They have the same functions, right? They use resources and they expend power, energy, right? So anyway, or they put out power. So what I want you to do is study the engine of the human. And the human engine is the brain. And as I said in module number 1, all of this stuff gets a lot more simple when you go down deeper and you understand the mechanics of it all. So one thing that the human brain does is called deletion. Deletion is where you leave certain things out. Your brain will do this intentionally, and not consciously, but your brain will do this intentionally because we have access to millions and millions and millions of bits of information on a daily basis. The brain can pay attention to everything that it has exposure to, right? But you and I would go crazy if we had to consume and then filter through all of the information that's available to us. So the brain deletes most of it. Almost all information that's available to us gets deleted out of the brain. Otherwise, we just go crazy. So the brain has something called the reticulating activate, or the reticular activating system. That is like the doorway in to what you pay attention to, meaning that the brain will say, okay, this is important to us, so I'm going to direct it into our attention, and everything else that's not important to us, I'm going to let my my psyche, I'm going to let my conscious mind never even know about it, right? I'm just going to filter all of those out. And it protects us in many ways. It protects us from just the frustration and having to deal with all of this stuff. But sometimes it protects us from our emotional wounds, the things that we don't want to touch, that we don't want to know, that we're afraid of. Our reticular activating system will kick that out for us so that we don't have to touch it. And so there's an ignorance that a lot of us, we all have it. There's an ignorance that we all have. And a lot of times that ignorance is designed to protect our emotions. And so the brain won't even pick stuff up. And I mean, all you got to do is put 3 human beings in a room, tell them to survey the room, and then tell you what they saw. And you'll get like 3 completely different uh, pictures of what was in the room, right? Because we're taking in different things according to what our reticular activating system says is important. And we'll get into this later on, so don't worry too much about how that happens. We'll get into that in a little bit, but it's all of our internal stuff, right? We basically tell our brain, these are the things I'm interested in, and so if you find them, let me know, right? It's kind of like when you buy a car, and then the next day, or as long as you have that car, you see all kinds of other cars that are the exact same model and especially the same color. Those were all there. It's not like everybody bought the same model and color that you did at the same time. Those were all there. Your reticular activating system just didn't know it was important enough for you to pay attention to. So it didn't let you know, hey, we got another, a white infinity coming at us from the other side of the road. It didn't tell you that because it didn't know you wanted to know about it, right? But then once something becomes important for a number of reasons, then it stops being deleted. So that's one thing that the human brain does. Another thing that the human brain does is called distortion. And what distortion is is a filtering mechanism to where we distort the things that we see in our senses or experience in our senses to match something that we already expect or already believe, right? So we have these beliefs, we have these stories, we have these expectations, and something can happen out in the world and we can go, see, I told you so. Where somebody else that doesn't have a story or has the opposite story can see the exact same thing and go, see, I told you so. That means something completely different to them than it does to you because you have different stories. But the human brain says, how can I manipulate this thing to match what I believe? And then the other person's brain says, how can I manipulate that same thing to match what I believe? And that's why two people can look at the exact same thing and have completely different experiences of it. It's because the brain is distorting the sensory experience to match what fits the internal reality, right? And remember, one of the things that I said in the first module is the idea that the map is not the territory. So just because you have this map and it looks a certain way, factually, that doesn't mean everybody's going to experience it the same way. And this is one of the main reasons why, is because we're distorting everything to match what it is that is already inside of us in the form of beliefs and expectations and stories and all of that kind of stuff, right? And then the third thing that it does is generalize. Now, first of all of these things have pros and cons to them. All of them can be positive and all of them can be negative. So there's no inherent good or bad qualities to any of these three things. It just depends on how they're being applied. So as a coach, we need to know how the brain works, and then we need to help ourselves or our clients change. Maybe we help them stop distorting something and we have them explore it instead of just immediately labeling and distorting it. Or we intentionally go out and open up the deletion filter to look for other things that we haven't seen before, right? Or we have to navigate our generalization. So brains generalize information because it's faster. It's just more efficient that way, right? It's like I'm looking out my window right now and I see this structure. It's white. It's looks like there's a hole in it, and there's a human inside of it. Underneath his arm, there's this like a handle, and towards the back, there's a bunch of things inside. It looks like a compartment. Looks like there's some red lights maybe on it and a couple circular things. Now, if my brain didn't generalize, I would have to study this thing and go, what in the world is that? But because my brain knows that that is a structure that sits on four wheels, even though I can't see all four wheels, my brain goes, oh, that's a car. And it's actually a truck, right? It's a vehicle. My brain doesn't have to learn everything as though it's the first time because of our ability to generalize. So that's how the brain does things so quickly. So we don't have to relearn anything. Like we don't have to relearn what a computer is, what a chair is, what a car is, what a table is, because they pretty much have the same general form, right? Where generalization becomes negative is our fears become generalized. And so let's say this happens a lot. I was just talking to one of my clients earlier, actually yesterday, and we were talking about some relationship pain that she had in the past. And she was saying, all men hurt me. And I go, well, time out. Like, I'm a man, and I'm pretty sure I haven't hurt you inside of a relationship, right? And I know there's like, 3.5 billion of us on the planet, and I'm pretty sure they all haven't hurt you. And of course, I was being a little facetious, but I was attacking the language that she was using. And her generalization turned the finite number of negative experiences she's had in relationships, which honestly aren't that many. right? And I don't say this to be insensitive, but I don't even think she had double digits. I think it was like single digits. And so you can't tell me that if you've had an experience with a single digit amount of a thing, then that means all those things must match your experience. You can't tell me that. Now, I'm not saying that those negative experiences weren't really painful, because I know some of them were, but her brain was overgeneralizing and creating misery because now she doesn't trust men. Now she's afraid of allowing herself to be loved, right? That's her brain generalizing. It's generalizing to try to protect her, but it's generalizing in a way that's not allowing her to be happy, right? So all of these things can be positive or negative depending on how they are applied, but these are the three main functions of the brain, the three main muscles, if you will, of the brain. Okay. Now, from a visual standpoint, this is what it looks like. You've got an external event that comes into your awareness, right? The arrow that's pointing at the eyes. And it's not only the eyes, it's not only the things that we see. All of these things are happening with any of our senses, right? Remember, we have those five senses. It's happening with all of them. So it's not just limited to our visual senses, but we experience some external event and then our head goes to work. Our brain deletes some stuff, it distorts some stuff, it generalizes some stuff, it creates a bunch of head talk, it cycles through memories, it tries to remember past decisions that were made, it gets filtered through meta programs, it considers all the perceptions that it's ever had in the past, it filters through the values, it assesses against the current beliefs that it has, it bumps up against the drivers, and it goes through all of these identities. I mean, it's really like a pinball machine, right? This external event comes in and then it just pinballs against all of this stuff that's already stored in the brain. And on top of that, to the right, you've got internal representational systems that we'll get into, the state of awareness that you're in. So you could see something when you're in an angry state and have a completely different experience of it than when you're in a happy state. Your physiology, if you're irritated physically, maybe you've got a lot of pain in your body, you're going to experience the event different than if you're sitting on the sand at a beach, having a drink and just loving life, right? So all of these things and more, by the way, but this is like high level chunks. All of these things are manipulating this external event, and then you see the little arrow coming down at the bottom. Then a behavior is created. Then we decide to act on it. Sometimes we don't do much. Sometimes you just pay attention. Sometimes we actually physically act, right? But we do something with this external event only after it pinballs inside of our brain and all around all the different edges of our spirit and all of our neurology to then make something of it. So that's why you can have two people that experience the exact same external event, and by the time it pinballs all the way around, the behavior can be completely different, and yet it's the exact same stimulus, right? So let me know if this is making sense to you. And I want to take some time, and for some of you, you already knew a lot of this stuff. Maybe this is just confirmation. For some of you, maybe you knew the concept and I'm just putting different labels on it. And then maybe for some of you, this is totally new. When I learned this stuff and it was totally new 11 years ago, I mean, it just changed everything. And I started getting super excited, going, oh my goodness, that's why this, and that's why this, and that's why this. It's like when you understand how the human brain works, so many things in your life and so many things in the world will make sense. And that's exciting, right? Because if you understand what's happening, you can control it better. Yeah, thanks, Catherine. She says that image looks like me. Yeah, it kind of does. Same haircut. So we can't control something we don't understand. That's one of the reasons why there's prejudice in the world, in my opinion. That's one of the reasons why there's so much conflict, is because we don't understand what it is that we're projecting our anger onto, or we're projecting our expectations, or we're projecting our irritation, or we're projecting our pain. A lot of times it's because we don't understand the person, or we don't understand the situation, we don't understand the scenario. And if we don't understand something, then we can't control it if we dive into it. Therefore, we'd rather keep it away from us. And one of the ways we keep those things away from us is by forming negative opinions of them. It's just a form of protection, because the human brain doesn't like to not know. It doesn't like to not be in control, right? It doesn't. I think I might have mixed myself up there, but it hates to not be in control. So that's how all of this is working. Now, if you take a look at this and just think of like a relationship, right? The relation, and by the way, thank you, Mary, this is so true, because this whole thing happens instantaneously. The human brain is so powerful that it can run all of these functions, much like a computer. It can run all of these functions instantaneously. That's how powerful the brain is. And so it doesn't feel like all of these things are happening. And one of the things that we do in personal development is we try to slow the process down and go, okay, this is an external event. Let me see how this filters through my values, and I'm going to assess it. But I'm going to slow down, and I'm going to take the time intentionally to assess this through my values and see if this is something that I want to react to, or see if this is something that has nothing to do with me. And when we can slow this process down, then we have more conscious control over it. And we'll get into that in the 4 learning styles here in a little bit on this module. But if you think about relationships, right? I mean, people are doing these things so fast. It's amazing that any 2 people can get along, right? If you think of it that way, it's amazing. There's so many variables that every human being has. There are no 2 human beings that are alike when you take a look at all the internal games, right? Even, identical twins that have everything else otherwise equal, grew up in the same home, have like the exact same features and all that. There's still so much variation inside. And so no 2 people ever see the world the exact same way. And there's so many variables that it's actually a big deal, I think, when people can get along, right? So what'll happen is, a couple people are saying, what's the IR stand for? It stands for internal representational systems. We'll get into that later. That's later in the course. But basically it means visual, auditory, kinesthetic, auditory, digital people. There's different ways that we consume information. So that's what it means. And like I said, we'll get into it. What was I just saying? Oh, so that, it's amazing that people can even get along, right? And what'll happen is, when we understand these processes, you will find yourself becoming more and more unoffendable, because you'll just understand the process. It's like choosing food at a buffet. You only choose the food that you want to eat, and you don't put any food on your plate that you don't want to eat. But most people are, or at least a lot of people, are walking through life as though other people or other entities are forcing them to eat food that they don't want to eat. And they feel like a victim, and they feel like raging against the person or the system or the programming or whatever. And the reality is, you're in control. You're the one that walked down that buffet line and put the food on your plate. And like we said in the first module, even if you didn't place the circumstances there, you have responsibility to respond to the circumstances. And all of that becomes easier as we slow this process down. All right, the 5 meaning filters. There are 5 filters that the brain uses to create meanings. We're going to dive deeper into the top 3, and then the bottom 2 are pretty self-explanatory. So the top one is called meta programs. This meta means like macros at a very, very high level. How are we programmed? This stuff is going to fascinate you. It's so fascinating to me how we are programmed at a meta level. The second one is values. That's the things that are important to you. We all have a system of values that are operating, but most of us aren't consciously aware of what those values are. I'll teach you a process that is super, super powerful for helping people understand what their values are. Beliefs, those are the stories that we have inside of our head, and what what is in not important, but what is true, basically. And we operate our entire lives on the beliefs that were created early on in childhood. Most of our beliefs are fully formed before the age of 6. So think about that. Most beliefs, which provide the foundation for everything we've been talking about so far, provides the foundation for all that pinballing effect, right? Most beliefs are fully formed before the age of 6. That doesn't mean that we won't continuously learn information. We will. But most of the folders that we take that information and put it into is already formed by the time we're 6. The human brain does everything that it possibly can to figure out the world, what's safe, what's nurturing, what is your place in the world, and where you don't belong, and all those kinds of things. Those are generally formed by the age of 6, the majority of our belief system. And so here's the crazy thing: until and unless people understand this kind of work and they do some self exploration and they take a look at the beliefs they've been operating by, most humans, most adults are navigating the planet with toddler belief systems. Think about that. Now, I know it won't be hard for you to find somebody in your life that already acts like a child, right? And their responses to things are super immature, and they don't seem to be able to have, effective adult conversations, or they keep getting in trouble doing things they know they shouldn't be doing. Well, a lot of times it's because these adults are just literally 40-year-old kids. And when you understand that, then it's easier uh, to to deal with their behavior. It's easier to not take things personally, like I was saying earlier. So most of our belief systems are just left over from our early childhood until we get in and do this work. Isn't that fascinating? Somebody said, "Yeah, my father's a 58-year-old toddler." Somebody says, "I dated some of those people, some of those adult toddlers." Right. And here's what I think is beautiful about all of this work. The more you understand about human nature, the more simple it becomes and the more compassionate you become. It's much easier to be compassionate towards somebody when you understand they're just spiraling out of control because they don't have a handle on their beliefs, or they don't have a handle on their identities, or they don't like themselves, or their pinball uh, ingredients are just out of whack. It's so much easier for you to have compassion for that human being and not engage with family members or friends, or anybody really at the same level that you might have engaged in before. And to me, that's maybe the most valuable piece of human development, is when we can create more compassion for ourselves, for others, and we can teach it to the people that are watching, whether it's team members or children or what have you. Like, compassion is such a pure and positive human state. So those are the 5 meaning. Oh, the bottom 2, memories. That's just all the things that we remember, right? There's neuroscientists or scientific studies now that are saying that our bodies react biologically even before the brain gets involved sometimes, and that's kind of like the instinct idea. But there's science that says a lot of times our bodies will react without our brain even knowing about the stimulus, at least the conscious brain even knowing about the stimulus. It's just we have a physical reaction that just takes over, right? And those memories are lodged in the neurology. Those memories are lodged in our cells, in our physical body, and then a lot of those memories are stored in our brain. But what happens is our brain likes to repeat its decisions from the past because new decisions means potential new outcomes, which means potential new unfamiliar territory. And the brain would rather deal with something familiar than something unfamiliar because the brain doesn't like to not be in control. So even if the familiar is painful, the brain at an unconscious level would rather experience familiar pain than unfamiliar anything. That unfamiliar word is so scary to the brain that it would rather experience familiar pain or familiar misery. That's why so many people stay in situations, whether it's relationships or jobs or health circumstances or whatever. So many people stay in and they tolerate negative experiences because the brain knows how to deal with this. It's familiar. So the brain would rather repeat past decisions, which is number 5, based on those memories, than it would make new decisions. That's just the reality. And so a lot of people really get frustrated with themselves because they don't know why they won't just do this new thing that they learned. Well, part of it is because your brain's just operating on memories and it's making old decisions because those are familiar. Your brain doesn't want you to fail. Your brain actually wants you to succeed. And one of the ways it tries to succeed is by repeating past decisions based on past memories. So it's doing what it thinks is positive, but oftentimes it's giving us a negative outcome or just an outcome that we don't want. Yeah, Carol says we can also be compassionate when we realize that we still have some of those toddler beliefs. Absolutely. Okay, so those are the 5 meaning filters. Actually, you know what? I kind of jumped ahead of myself in just explaining these, but let me explain them in a little bit more. Filter number 1, metaprograms. It's this general macro belief, as I was talking about. We're going to get into there's many meta programs. I forget the exact number right now, so I don't want to give you a number, but there's many different programs that we'll look into. One of them is called a direction filter, and that means, are we programmed toward or away from something? So for instance, 2 people might be taking a vacation to experience whatever that vacation has for them, or they might be experiencing or going on vacation to get away from something, right? Some people want to be successful so that they can have money, have the prestige, and have the freedom. Some people want to be successful so they don't have to be broke anymore. Those are 2 fundamentally different motivations. Are you motivated toward what you want, or are you motivated away from what you don't want? And those are really the only 2 motivating factors for human beings. You're either chasing something or you're running from something. And neither one of those are positive or negative. They both are great in certain situations. So again, we just have to learn how to navigate them appropriately and in a healthy manner. So there's many more meta programs similar to that we'll get into. Values, I talked about. It's a filter that allows us to evaluate everything, evaluate partners, evaluate things, evaluate opportunities, and it helps us decide if something is good or bad, or if something is right or wrong based on what's important to us. If belonging is important to me, then I might choose to smoke a cigarette when I'm developing in my early stages, because belonging and having people think well of me is more important than the potential that this thing might kill me 60 years from now. And so we have to take a look at what values are causing our decisions, and are they causing us to have positive decisions or negative decisions? And if they're not causing positive decisions, then we can change the values, or we can just realize that other values are more important. There's a lot of really cool things that we can do. with the awareness around values. And then it also helps us decide how we feel about our actions. So somebody might come to your door, and depending on what they say or do, will determine whether it's okay morally from a values perspective for you to slam the door in their face. Somebody might do something so egregious that you'll slam the door in their face, and that's okay, and you don't have any negative feeling towards it. And then other people, you would never do that, right? Let's take a look at maybe, let's take a really end of the spectrum example. Let's say killing. Most people would say they would never kill a person. But I believe, given certain circumstances, almost everybody could kill a person, right? Maybe to protect somebody that you love. So people will go, I'll never kill a human being. Really? Well, what if this human being is about to kill your child? Then they go, well, yeah, I'll slice him up and kill him without a second thought. All right. So in that scenario, because of our values, because what's important to us, a certain action is okay when in another scenario, that same action is not okay. And it could be the exact same action, right? So let's say you have somebody, and I know sorry for using this like gruesome example, but let's just take it all the way to the extreme. If you see somebody that's about to kill somebody that you don't know, or about to kill somebody that you hate, you might not act the same way as if that same person, had a gun to your child's head. So circumstances can determine which values get activated, and our values determine which behaviors are okay in a certain scenario, right? And then values are also in a hierarchy. So we have value, we have a highest value, then we have a second highest value, we have a third highest value. And knowing what your values are in the hierarchy is really important, and it'll help you deal with everything. And what you'll find is that anytime that you're in conflict of any kind, it's almost always an issue with your values. Whether it's a relationship conflict or a moral internal conflict, should I do this or should I do that? It's these two values that are competing with each other, right? One thing's important to you, but another thing's also important to you. And what are you going to choose? And then what's really fun is when we take a look at, and we'll do this in the meta program section, when we take a look at your internal values versus your external values, meaning external values are things like other people's judgment of you. Internal values would be your judgment of yourself. What matters more to you? Almost everybody would say, my internal judgment of myself matters more to me. However, how many times have you done something that you wouldn't have otherwise done because you wanted to appease somebody else? Well, in that moment, you're sacrificing your own internal value for somebody else's value, all right, or for somebody else's judgment. So I'm just previewing some of the things we're going to dive into, but that's the second filter of values. Beliefs are the stories that we repeatedly tell ourselves based on the evidence that we've collected. Simply put, at some point in time, we started a story and then we collected evidence to make the story true. And that's how all of our beliefs are formed. And then they become generalized, and it forms our expectations of the world and our presuppositions, which just basically means, what do we presuppose is going to happen, or how people are, etc. And our beliefs are really powerful, so much so that it's kind of like an on-off switch, right? If you have a certain belief, it might not allow you to do something, whereas other people don't have any resistance to doing something because their beliefs are not standing in their way. And it's basically why we do everything, right? Those are our beliefs. Memories are the representations of how we reacted in the past. They lead to beliefs, or they are based on beliefs. They support our values. And as I said, it's just easier to go back and say, this matches a memory that I had in the past, so let me go ahead and react to it just like I did in the past. And that's where that next piece there, I already alluded to it. It's not just psychologists, it's neuroscience as well. Say that a lot of our reactions are actually just a collection of memories, and we just respond to the memories, right? And then the next one is decisions. This is obviously the choices that we make based on those memories. And so if we can remember a time that we already experienced, we might as well just make the same decision. And a lot of times that gets to our awareness, right? Like we won't even, it gets to our awareness in a negative sense, meaning that we become unaware of a lot of the things we're making because our decisions are just unconscious reactions rather than intentional choices. So, having said all of that, how are you guys doing, by the way? I know we've been talking a lot about heady, intellectual kind of stuff. If it's fascinating to you, you're going to love it. If it's not fascinating to you, you're going to be like, all right, when can we move on? But I just want to check in. How are you guys doing? Okay, cool. We got uh, honestly, the brain is swimming a bit. Okay, that's good. So, one of the things I want to say is obviously in a group program like this, I don't have the ability to interact with each of you individually. You're not in a classroom. I can't sense who's getting it, who's not getting it. I can't sense who's doing dishes right now and who's just all in and only focused on this. But the good news is that you have access to all the recordings. So if these things, especially these conceptual kind of stuff, and especially if it's new, if it's causing overwhelm or if it's causing your brain to feel like drunk or whatever, then just go back and listen to them over. That's actually going to be part of your home play assignment for this module is just go back and read it again because some of this stuff is very, very rich and it's tough to digest, especially all at once. So that's the good thing about these being archived and you can go back and re-consume them and re-experience them on your own time. And I would also say that if you are struggling a little bit, I need you to manage your own irritation. So let's say you're not understanding something that I just said, and especially obviously if you're like listening to the replay, then you don't have you don't have the ability to interact with me live. But if you're on the live webinar, and I'm going to say this for everything that you experience going forward, like any kind of learning, if you get frustrated by something and you don't understand a certain concept and maybe you ask the teacher, in this case maybe you send in a comment to me and I don't see it and I don't clear it up for you, I don't want you to carry that irritation all the way for the rest of the course, for the rest of that module, because then you won't get any of the other stuff either. So just allow yourself to remember, I'm going to go back to this. Maybe make yourself a note, put it in your calendar. I'm going to go back to this because I didn't really quite get the whole generalization thing. So I'm gonna go back and listen to that piece. If you make that decision, then your brain doesn't have to hold on to the irritation anymore because your brain knows, all right, we're going to handle that later. I can get back to being present. So it's up to you to manage your irritations. This is one of the self-awareness pieces that are really powerful. Manage your own irritations, not just for this course, but everywhere in your life. And when there's something that can't be solved or addressed right now in the moment, you can just put a pin in it. Even if there's irritation attached to it, you can just let the irritation stay attached to it, but then move forward without the irritation and still experience whatever it is that you're going to experience going forward. And that's, think of how many people will get up on the wrong side of the bed, so to speak, right? They have something happen in the early part of the day, and then it just messes up the entire day. And how many times do we have negative experiences on this planet based on something that happened earlier, and especially based on things that we don't control anyway? And how many times do we poison our potential joy and happiness because of what somebody else did or said or didn't do or didn't say yesterday? Whatever form of yesterday it is. Could be 5 minutes ago yesterday. It could be 5 years ago yesterday. It could be 5 decades ago yesterday. But just think of how many times we poison the present moment based on past experiences. And in that moment, and we all do it, I do it, in that moment, we are taking for granted the present moment. We're taking for granted the fact that we're alive and we're healthy, and it could be a lot worse than it really is, right? So a lot of this work is about detaching from the past and being present as much as you possibly can. All right. Yeah, so a lot of you are saying, I love this stuff. It's cool. It's all in. Fantastic. Okay, so let's jump into the 4 stages of learning. And this is going to be a little bit more application based on the foundation stuff that we just talked about. These 4 stages of learning is basically how we as human beings learn anything and everything, right? But especially cognitive stuff. Cognitive stuff that requires our attention, our cognition, our mental efforting, right? We have these 4 stages of learning. And understanding these stages will help you navigate through them. It's kind of like the compassion piece that we talked about a few moments ago. The more that you understand the process, the less frustrated you'll be, the less irritated you'll be, whether it's understand the process as it's relating to your journey or understand the process as it's relating to somebody else's journey. Okay, so let's dive into each of these 4 stages. The first stage is called unconscious incompetence. So unconscious means you're not aware. Incompetence means you can't do. So in this phase, you can't do something, but you're not even aware of it, so it doesn't really bother you. So you don't know what you don't know. And there's a phrase called ignorance is bliss, and that's really what this is talking about, because for a lot of people, being ignorant to something means you're not angry, you don't have to experience the frustration or whatever, you'd rather just not know. Now, I don't subscribe to that anymore, because if it's something that I can change to improve my life, then I want to be aware of it. That's why I really like when pain comes up. I really like when when I bump up against some of my emotional blocks and I feel like crying, or I do cry, or I feel the anger triggers coming up, right? I love that stuff now because I know I can deal with it. Either I can deal with it myself, or I have such a tremendous support system of coaches, as all of you do now too, that can help me deal with it, right? Therefore, I'm not afraid of it. I'm not afraid of it coming up because I know it can be handled. People are afraid of their emotions coming up because they don't know how to handle them. And so what most people do is they just do what I call whack-a-mole. They have the whack-a-mole strategy. You know, the old circus game, right? The mole comes up and you whack it back down. That's what most people are doing with their emotions because they don't know how to handle them. And since they don't believe they can be handled, they rather not touch them. And so they would rather be ignorant here than feel something that they can't do anything about. Well, I wish people would more people knew that you can actually deal with your emotions, so there's nothing to be afraid of. Remember, we fear that which we don't control, or we don't think we can control. So unconscious incompetence is when there's excitement and you're enthusiastic, and like let's just take personal development for instance. You find maybe you can remember the very first book you read or the very first exposure you had to personal development. You're like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. And then you're just so excited and you go in and you go after it. Well, at that moment that you're going after it, you don't have any idea what's ahead of you. You don't have any idea some of the challenges, some of the pain, some of the irritations. You don't have any idea because you don't know about it, so you just go, right? And then very quickly, as soon as you become aware of something, now you enter the conscious phase. In the very beginning, as soon as you become aware of something that takes some effort or takes some practice to master, you can't do it. You know about it, but you can't do it. So you're conscious of it. You know what you don't know, but you don't have the skills or the awareness or the abilities to make the changes that you want to make. So in the personal development world, let's say you get in and then you learn that you can get rid of certain kinds of fears, let's say, and you get all excited and then you try to do it for yourself and it doesn't work. So you know that you should be able to get rid of this fear, but you can't do it. You're consciously incompetent. And that doesn't feel good, so people get frustrated. The reason people get frustrated at this stage is because of the process of improvement, meaning it takes a certain process to learn this skill. And we don't like, especially as adults, we don't like having to fall down and get back up again. Kids don't care. You watch a kid learning how to walk, they don't care. They fall on their butt, they hop right back up. Adults usually don't work that way because we've got all the memories and the past decisions and all the identities and all the meta programs and all that stuff we're going to dive into. We've got all of those things that pretend us falling down means something really bad and we should just sit in the shame of it and not get back up and not try. Kids don't have that. Kids are like, just bounce back up and let's get at it again. So for adults, the frustration comes from the process of trying to do something and not being able to. That doesn't feel good for most of us. So that's the second stage. Now you work on things. Let's say you learn about how to overcome certain fears and you dive in and you practice, and pretty soon you start to get the hang of it. And then you are able to make whatever changes you want to make in your head talk, or you notice that the fears aren't there, or what a specific fear isn't there, or whatever. So you're able to conquer it. Whatever the it is, that means you're now competent and you know that you're competent. So you know what to do, you know how to do it to be successful, but your habits aren't automated yet. So you have to still put effort into it. So you have to notice the negative head talk and then do something about it. You're able to handle it, but it takes effort. And people get frustrated in this stage because it takes effort, because of the judgment of the process improvement. So let me make these two distinctions. In stage 2, unconscious incompetence, people get frustrated because of the process of improvement. In stage 3, people get frustrated because of the judgment of that process of improvement. So what that means is, in stage 2, people get frustrated because they have to keep working at it and they don't like the feeling of working at it and not being able to do it. In stage 3, we get frustrated because we shouldn't have to do this anymore. I mean, how many of you, by a show of hands online here, just type in, yes, that's me. How many of you can recognize that sometimes you tell yourself, I shouldn't have to deal with this anymore? I mean, think of, I know better than this. I've been working on this for so long. I teach this stuff. It shouldn't keep coming up for me. How many of you are shooting on yourselves because of the judgment that you shouldn't have to deal with your fears anymore after having to deal with them for so long, or you shouldn't have doubts anymore? You know the answer to this. Why does it keep coming back up? And yet you still get frustrated about it, but it's the judgment of it. It's not the process itself. It's the judgment of the process itself that it shouldn't be this way. All right, I got a lot of people here that are saying, yes, that's me. It's taking so long. See, what's happening is you're comparing yourself to something better. It's just that simple. When you compare your current circumstances to something better, you'll feel bad. When you compare your current circumstances to something worse, you'll feel good. It's just that simple. Now, the brain is a comparing mechanism. It does that all the time. You cannot turn off the comparing element of your brain. You also cannot turn off the judging element of your brain. And they're very similar and related. Like, a lot of people go, I need to stop being judgmental. And I say, that's physically impossible. What are you going to do? You're going to turn off the muscle in your brain that judges everything. And what I tell people, and I completely believe this, even if you could do that, you'd be dead in a week. You probably wouldn't last the rest of today. Like, literally deceased, dead. if you now told your brain, stop judging, even though that's what you do, even though you distort and generalize and delete based on your ability to judge, and you do all of that so I can have a better life. But right now, I want you to stop that. Your brain can't. And it also cannot stop comparing. But you can control the comparisons. That's the key. You can control the comparisons. So if you're looking at somebody else who did something that you're trying to do, and you go, wow, look at how easy it was for them. First of all, most of the time you're completely wrong. You're completely wrong. You're judging your worst to their best. You're pretending that they don't have the doubts and the fears like we talked about earlier, and you're completely wrong. But even if you're not wrong, and that person's journey has been all lollipops and unicorns, you're telling yourself, well, mine should be that way also. Says who? Says who? Where's the rule that says your journey is supposed to look like this? Whatever this is. My journey is supposed to look like hers. My journey is supposed to look like his. My journey is supposed to look like the way I decided it was supposed to look when I was ignorant about all this stuff, right? I mean, how many of you, at my hands totally raised as high as it can be on this one, you've decided before you start something that the journey is supposed to look a certain way? How many of you have ever actually had that happen? How many of you have experienced a journey, especially a significant one, that actually did look anything like you thought it was going to look, right? Most of the significant journeys that we have in our lives that provide us with the most important lessons that we need to learn don't look anything like we thought they were supposed to look or were going to look, right? But yet we have this thought process that it's supposed to be easy, it's supposed to be fast, it's supposed to look like that. And most of the time we're wrong. 99.9% of the time we're wrong. And so we're creating misery based on a false expectation of what the process is supposed to look like. And then we're judging ourselves and beating ourselves up. And it's all completely self-created frustration. And it's usually, well, it's always pointless, but it's usually wrong. You know how many people go through some kind of emotional or intellectual, like evolution kind of process, right? Personal evolution, working on themselves. You know how many people go through those things and they get so frustrated because it's taking too long? And then I say, you know what? You're ahead of the pack. You're actually going faster than anybody I've ever seen before. So even when they're factually going quick, they're still creating frustration because their journey doesn't match what they thought it was supposed to be. And that's tragic when humans create misery when they're actually doing well, sometimes doing better than what most people are doing. And yet they still have that self-criticism that says, well, it's supposed to be easier, faster, better than this, so I'm just going to live in misery. Here's what I promise you. Your misery will not help you improve. Your shame will not help you improve. I posted on Facebook earlier, it's much easier to make improvements in life with appreciation than it is with shame. So as much as sometimes our ego feels good for some stupid reason to shame ourselves, we have to remember that will never help us go any further, any easier with shame. We're always making the process harder with our negative judgments and our abuse. It's this phase right here that's, in my experience, the most frustrating for most people. And it's simply because they don't understand it. They don't understand that they're just in this place. And they also don't understand that stage 4, unconscious competence, is almost never experienced by anybody. But it's the thing that most people are expecting to get, where everything's automated, where I learned how to get rid of some fears in a course that I took, in a book that I read, in a coaching session that I went through. Therefore, I should never experience any fear ever. for the rest of my life. Of course, that's what you want. We all want that. Of course, that's what we want. And it's so comical to think that is remotely possible, especially when you understand everything that we're talking about on this module. You'll realize that is so ridiculous to expect that. Yet that's what most people want. It's like, I already did the work that one time. Shouldn't that one time piece of effort overcome 54 years of programming? Shouldn't that work that way? No, it actually doesn't work that way. Sorry to tell you, it doesn't work that way. But that's what a lot of people want. They want to do one-time effort and then automate all of their processes to be positive so that they never experience any of the negative stuff, right? But here's the other thing that makes stage 4 so tricky. Look at the title of it. It's unconscious competence. What that means is you're so good at something, you don't have to pay attention to it anymore. You're competent to the point that you don't need cognition anymore. You don't need effort anymore. It happens on its own. But when it does happen on its own, you don't notice it anymore. So let's say you've got 10 things that you're focused on improving in your life. And you're looking at all 10 of these things, and they're all stage 3. And you're like, dang, I got all these things that I have to constantly work on. It's not supposed to be this difficult. I should be able to just put a little bit of effort into it. Or because I've been working on this for several years, it should be all gone by now. It should be in stage 4 by now. It should be automated. I shouldn't even have to be aware of these things. But you keep going, let's say, and then let's say you get to that place of being unconsciously competent in 3 of them. But you're unconsciously incompetent, or you're unconsciously competent rather. So you don't pay attention to them anymore. So you don't even realize that you're competent in them anymore. All you're now looking at is the 7 things that you're still consciously competent in, and you still have to effort. Now, if you take a look at all 7 of those things as a whole, everything you're focused on is still requiring your effort. It's so draining. And your unconscious mind is going, hey, man, how about these other 3 things that I just took over for you that you don't have to pay attention to anymore? At least can I get a little bit of appreciation here? And then you keep working on 7 of those things, and then 2 or 3 more go into unconscious competence, but you don't pay attention to them. So everything you're focused on is still difficult. That's why this is so tricky. It's difficult to get to this place, especially with the things that we really want to be unconsciously competent about, like fears and negativity and doubts. We'll never get there. But the things that we can get there with, we become unconscious of, so we don't pay attention anyway. That's why this phase is so difficult. So what I want you to do, and what I want you to do with your clients, is fall in love with stage 3. Fall in love with the fact that you have competence. And if you're in stage 2, fall in love with the idea of moving into stage 3. If you fall in love with the process and the ability to do the work that most people will never have the ability to do, then it won't matter to you that they get into stage 4. And because you'll have more gratitude and appreciation, here's the kicker, more of them will make it into stage 4. Because shame will never get them there. Irritation will never get them there. But gratitude and appreciation and enjoyment of the process has the ability to get them there. So when it comes to the human experience, what's important with anything that's going to require any kind of development, emotional development, cognitive development, psychological development, like we're all in the personal development journey in some way, right? In this journey, you've got to fall in love with the process, because if you're only in love with the reward, but you don't like the process, chances are you'll never get the reward. And even if you do get the reward, it'll be built on irritation, and you won't experience the reward like you think you're going to experience it anyway. So this journey is about falling in love with the process. And what happens is life slows down. You get more out of the present moment than when you're just looking ahead at the reward going, man, I can't wait to get through all of this stuff that I hate. I got to get to the reward. And you can probably even hear it in my voice, although I didn't intentionally do it. When you focus on the present moment, you fall in love with it. It's a calming sensation. And if you think about how many times we're programmed in society to just keep looking ahead, right? People don't like their jobs to look ahead to the weekend. People don't like the certain, pains that they're going through. So they look ahead till next year when something will be gone and they'll finally be able to enjoy life. How many experiences are people jumping over to try to get to something else? Number one, that shortens your life experience. It might not shorten your calendar days, but it shortens your experience of life. Because if you have 7 days to experience, but you only enjoy 2 of them, you've hopped over 5 of them, then it feels like you were only here 2 days. And the times that you were those other 5 days, you were miserable anyway. So it kind of slows the process down, but in a negative sense. It's almost like torture, right? But what if you could embrace and appreciate and be grateful for even the painful moments because of what they mean to you, because of the sacredness in them? If you could experience more of every single moment that you have, life tends to slow down and be much more joyful. And you get more of the lessons when you're not hopping over the experience. See, when you're hopping over the negative experiences, then you're also hopping over the lessons that are meant for you. And what does that mean? That that experience will be repeated. Just wait, it'll come again. And it'll continue to be repeated until you get the lesson. So the more that you just keep hopping over these experiences, the more you keep hopping over the lessons, and the less you learn, and the less you're actually in life. So those are the 4 stages of learning. And what you'll notice as you become more aware is that with certain things, you're just in a certain stage, and it'll be easier for you to go, oh, with this particular skill or this particular emotional pattern, I'm only in stage 2, but that's okay. So then what do I need to do to get to stage 3? And if you're in stage 3, what do you need to do to fall in love with the process instead of demanding that it move into stage 4 so you never have to deal with it again? So that understanding will lead to more compassion with yourself, and it'll lead to more enjoyment. So the last piece here is communicating with the unconscious mind. Now remember, pretty much all of our obstacles are at the unconscious level. They're the below the surface, with the iceberg analogy, below the soil. They're at the unconscious level. That's where all of the issues stem from. So if we're going to be able to play on that field, we have to know the rules. We have to know the language that the unconscious mind responds to if we're going to try to open that vault. And it's not difficult, but it's not common knowledge to most people. And it's not the way that we are typically programmed to speak. It's not something super new, like, learning a whole new dialect, but you just have to understand. So the unconscious mind, and on your handout, there's fill in the blanks, and you can see on the slides the answers that go in the blanks are bolded and italicized. So the unconscious mind has its own special language. It doesn't understand future tense. It doesn't care about the future. The unconscious mind is only connected to the now. So if you try to motivate your unconscious mind with a future reward, especially one that's way out into the future, it doesn't care. And that happens a lot with goal setting. It's like you're telling the unconscious mind, hey, just stay committed, stay in the game. Someday will feel really good. Your unconscious mind doesn't care about someday. It's like you're trying to write emotional IOUs to your unconscious mind, right? If you give me all of your effort and your attention and your commitment, like I know you can, speaking to your unconscious mind, if you give me all of that stuff and then achieve this goal for me, I promise you this emotion. It's like you're writing emotional IOUs to yourself. I owe you happiness if you can help me achieve this thing. And your unconscious mind, especially based on memories from the past, goes, nah, I can't cash that. That has no value in my experience. An emotional IOU from the future, which probably won't ever come true, especially based on everything that I remember that you've apparently forgotten from the past. So you go ahead and keep that emotional IOU, and I will keep protecting what I know. I mean, think of that. Like, that's how so many of us are operating when it comes to motivating ourselves. And the unconscious mind just won't have it. It does not care about the present tense. It also doesn't care about the tangible rewards. Come on, just really help me get this goal, and then I'll get this car, or I'll have all this money. Well, your unconscious mind will never drive that car. And your unconscious mind will never spend the money. And your unconscious mind knows there's no value in the physical money anyway. And so it doesn't care. But think about the head versus heart conflict, right? This is the conscious mind versus the unconscious mind. There's this dichotomy that's going to be woven into all of these coaching conversations. Our conscious mind wants the tangible rewards. Our unconscious mind couldn't care less. Our conscious mind, let's say, controls 10% of our power. Our unconscious mind controls 90. Which one wins? Even if the conscious mind somehow swallows some kind of motivation pill and gets going on a certain goal, the unconscious mind will eventually win. Why? Because the conscious mind has to sleep and the unconscious mind doesn't. Have you ever gone to bed feeling really good about yourself, feeling really motivated about something, feeling like I'm going to tackle tomorrow, I'm going to get all kinds of stuff done, and you wake up in a totally negative state? That's what the unconscious mind has the ability to do sometimes. Now, I'm not saying the unconscious mind, given control, always creates negative states. I'm just saying that your conscious mind is a finite fuel source. It's finite. It's only on part of the time. And our willpower is a finite source. So it's only operating part of the time. Your unconscious mind is operating all the time. It has more of the power. So we got to speak to the unconscious mind, right? It doesn't care about your tangible rewards. What it cares about is intangible rewards. That's why it's so important to focus on the feelings that you're going to have through the process. That's how to get the unconscious mind excited, is tell it about the positive feelings that the process will yield, not the positive tangible rewards that the result will yield. Doesn't care about that. The unconscious mind also doesn't understand negative words. This is one of the things that you will become such a powerful language cop around, I promise. You'll notice your own negative words and you'll notice other people's negative words. These words are hollow to the unconscious mind. It doesn't get it. It doesn't understand words like don't. So you tell your child, don't yell. The unconscious mind doesn't understand that command because it works like a heat-seeking missile. You didn't tell me what to do. If you say speak calmly, that's different. Now I know what to do instead of what not to do. You'll see this in parenting all the time because that's just the way parents do things, especially when they're under the control of their emotions, and then they draw on the memories of the way they parented or they were parented, right, in the past. You got to give yourself something to do. So it doesn't understand can't. It doesn't understand stop. It doesn't understand lose. It doesn't understand avoid. It doesn't understand any of those kinds. There are more. It doesn't understand any of those kinds of hollow negative words. That's why losing weight is not a friendly phrase to the unconscious mind. Stop smoking is not a friendly phrase to the unconscious mind. And then anything you say with can't is a poisonous phrase for many reasons. And we'll get into that when we talk about the disempowering language that we use, right? So I want you to be more aware of what comes out of your mouth, how you talk to yourself, how you language your goals, how you language your game plans on a minuscule level to a macro level, and pay attention to the way everybody else languages it as well. And you'll see that so many people are actually not speaking the unconscious mind's language, and that's why they're not getting what they want. And it's almost like, if somebody was speaking to another person, and this other person, the first person is telling the other person, like, get out of the road. And that the second person speaks Chinese, but the first person is speaking Spanish. You're like, well, that ain't ever going to work. And you could just sit there and almost kind of chuckle about it. You could yell as much as you want. She doesn't understand Spanish. So it doesn't matter how much you repeat it. It doesn't matter how much energy you have in it. She doesn't understand it. So it doesn't matter how much you get angry at yourself. It doesn't matter how much you really want your goals. It doesn't matter how repetitive you are with going after things. If you're not speaking the unconscious mind's language, all of that effort just doesn't matter. So the only things that the unconscious mind understands are action words and images that evoke feelings. That's the language of the unconscious mind. Action words and images that evoke feelings. Now, yesterday I talked about, or in module 1 rather, I talked about the power of our emotional experiences, right? In the 5 targets, I talked about experiences. One of the reasons that a lot of people really, really struggle is because our memories and our fears have action and image associated to them. They remember the actions, they remember the movements in the previous experience, and they remember the pain. They remember the images and the pain. That's what our fears have, and that's why the unconscious mind understands it. And then you try to motivate your unconscious mind by telling it about this theoretical thing that I was talking about in module 1, this theoretical dream that you have, but it has no action in it, the way most of us think about our goals and dreams. And there's also no image that's going to evoke any kind of feeling. If you try to feed your unconscious mind images of money and cars and tangible stuff, it doesn't evoke any kind of feeling because it doesn't care about that stuff. So it's literally putting the wrong fuel in the gas tank. And that's what most people are doing. So we have to put the right fuel in the unconscious gas tank so that we will be more motivated and inspired, more than motivation, to take action, because we're speaking the language that our most powerful achievement mechanism understands instead of the opposite. All right, so in this module, we talked all kinds of stuff about the brain, the 3 things that it does, and the meaning filters, and the stages of learning, and communicating with the unconscious mind. It's a lot of heady stuff. It's all foundational. You have to understand as much as you can about these foundational things, because I promise you, when we get to the tools and when we get to the exercises, your understanding of how the engine works will make it so much easier for you to manipulate the engine. But if you don't understand how the engine works, it'll be harder for you to manipulate it, and it'll be impossible for you to decide what to do when you come up against something that you haven't seen before. But if you understand, remember I said laws, not rules. If you understand the laws of how we learn, of how the brain operates, all these filters that we have, if you understand the laws, then you can help a client in a situation that you haven't experienced before, because you draw back on your laws that you know. You draw back on the foundation of human psychology and human behavior rather than remembering the rules. So this foundational piece is important. I want you to consume it again. I want you to engage your home play assignments. I have 3 for you this time. I want you to speak to your partner coach live, right? I talked about having a partner coach last module. This time it gets real. I want you to connect with your partner coach, and I just want you to speak to them live, and please keep it short. Please, please trust me. This is going to be, for most of you, your first interaction with your partner coach. I don't want that first interaction to set a precedent that it's going to take 2 hours to speak to your partner coach every time, because I promise you, you're going to have resistance to speaking to your partner coach if it takes that long. So keep it short. Hey, how you doing? Maybe tell me a little bit about you. We've got a long time to know about each other. And if it feels awkward to have this first conversation and keep it short, blame me. I'm the one that said it. I said keep it to 15 minutes or less. 15 minutes or less. I don't want it any longer than that. Trust me. Trust me. Even if you don't believe what I'm saying, just trust me. This is not my first rodeo. I've done this for a long time. Trust me, I would never tell you to do anything unless I believe it's going to improve your experience in this course and on this planet. So speak to your partner coach live, but keep it very short. Read through the manual pages again. This was dense information. So I want you to read through it again. When you're not listening to me explain it, and when you're not doing whatever it is that you're doing now, read it again, consume it, chunk it down if you have to. You don't have to read it all at the same time. Maybe you read 1 page and it takes, 10 or 15 minutes, and you really consume it, and maybe read it multiple times until you feel like you really got a sense of what that is, and then go on to the next page. Or maybe you just consume it all in once. If that's the way you do it better, if that's the way you learn better, you just kind of cram it all in. That's fine. However you learn better, do it that way, but reread the materials, please. This is rich, heavy information. It's all intellectual at this point. It's all awareness. It's all conceptual at this point. So the more that you can consume it, the more that you can digest it, the better you're going to be. Don't expect yourself to know it all, but set yourself up to win by consuming it multiple times. And then with the 4 stages of learning, I just want you to notice. I want you to notice where you are in each of the stages with different things in your life. If you find yourself being frustrated about something, just stop, check in, and go, what stage am I in? And just the awareness of knowing what stage you're in will calm you down generally, and it'll also tell you what to do next. So that's the awareness piece. All right. Having said that, are there any questions that you have? Somebody says, so I've been speaking Spanish to my German-speaking mind. Yes, you probably have been. Catherine says, are there any books outside the program that you recommend or hold up so it's not overload and overwhelm? Okay, I understand what you're saying. At first, I didn't understand what you were saying. I would hold up because we're going to go fast, and you're not going to need another piece of material to consume this piece of material, right? That doesn't mean that I'm saying, don't read other books, etc. But you don't need to read any other books to help understand this program. If you do, just like really fascinated about something, then I would suggest you read something that has an application that's important for you. Like maybe you read a parenting book. I mentioned parenting several times, and I'll keep doing that. Maybe that gets triggered for you, and you start reading a parenting book. So it's a specific application, but it's not this big macro knowledge, modality or knowledge source. Because I just don't want you to create confusion. I'm not saying that, my course is the only course out there, it's the best course out there, or whatever. But in order to get the most out of it, it's better to focus on it. And then you can go to something else and kind of compare them. But it doesn't usually serve you to get more um, with a big thing like this than to get more than one input at the same time. You can get more input after you're done with one input, but that would be my suggestion. You'll tell us more about the option for the exam to be certified later. Yes. At the end of the course, there is an online exam, and you just like taking a test, final basically, and you take that exam. And then there's also a video component to it where you film a video and send it to me. And those two pieces will make up the certification process for those of you that want a certification. Kathy says, "Is it open book?" Yes, you can. You'll have access to all the archives. You have access to all the materials. It's not difficult if you've gone through the program and if you take your time on it. If there's something that you don't remember, just go back into your material. Most of the intellectual material is like just fill in the blank and the sentence matches the sentence that was in your handout. And then some of the questions are more experiential, like when you did this exercise, tell me about your experience with it, because I need to know you actually did the exercise, right? So this is not just regurgitating information. That's not what I care about. I care about implementation. I care about you putting this on, right? Like putting it on like an outfit. I want you to use it. And you're going to have to explain what you experienced while you used it, for me to say, okay, you consumed it enough, and and I'm going to give you a certification under my name and under my brand. There is no additional cost to that. It's just a certification that is a piece of paper. What's most valuable is your ability to drive, right? Your ability to coach is more valuable than your coaching certification. I've been told that if I don't make or set goals, I won't get anywhere in life. I agree with that. But you got to set them the right way. You have to set goals and speak the goals in the language that your unconscious mind understands, because your unconscious mind is going to be the one that determines whether you get your goals or not. So if that's going to be the one that determines it, then speak its language. Perfect. Are there any other questions that I can handle right now? Yeah, I'm just looking at some of the comments before. Kirsten says, life slows down. I love my life now. Oh, that's so good. I'm always a work in progress. Yes, absolutely. Perfect. So if you have any other questions, take them to Facebook so everybody can benefit from the conversation. If there's anything super vulnerable or private or whatever, then you can go ahead and email me, and I will get to it and support you in any way that I possibly can. And as always, let us know how we can improve your experience of this program as much as possible. I appreciate you guys so much. I love all of this stuff. Here's a question. Somebody says, examples of number 3 assignment. So let's say you find yourself getting frustrated with making phone calls, and you just stop, you observe, and you go, okay, where am I in the stage, in the 4 stages in making phone calls? Do I know what to say? Do I know how to overcome whatever they might say or how to respond? Do I know how to handle my fears? If you know how to do all of those things, but you're still creating frustration, well, then you are in stage 2 because you know how to do it, but you're not able to. And so you just go, okay, well, I'm in stage 2. And if you're in stage 2, well, then now we got to figure out, all right, if I am not able to shift my awareness or shift my state to where I make the phone calls, then that's my target, right? Now I need to work on what I actually need to do to go to the next level. If you're stage 3 and you realize, you know what, I can put myself in the right mood, I just don't like having to do that. Then you go, okay, well, I'm in stage 3 and it's more about embracing than doing anything and just being compassionate and realize, wow, you actually have the ability to change your state. Once upon a time, you didn't. And for a lot of people, they don't. And then you just fall in love with the ability to change your state and you go on your merry way. So it's more of an awareness piece than anything to actually do, although your awareness might lead you into something to do. Perfect. And you say making phone calls is your number one struggle anyway. So I guess that's why I use that example. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll come to you with module number 3, and we dive deeper into understanding emotions and behavior patterns. Oh, such good stuff. Like, I want to start teaching it right now, but I won't. I'm going to end this module, and we'll see you on module 3. Take care, everybody. Talk to you on Facebook.